makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
A few days ago, I made a video about Jimmy Dore, one of the most outspoken members of the online left, and the video dealt with some of his more reprehensible views towards women and people in the LGBT community. And that is problematic in itself. I think someone who holds those views should be a cause for self-reflection if you actually think positively about them in other spheres. But in this video, I really want to talk about those other spheres, mainly his political views and why they're really problematic as well, and why Jimmy Dore is someone who, quite frankly, no one with any real concern over leftist causes should follow, because he is a charlatan, and most importantly, he is dumb. He is literally dumb. And the reason I say this is, well, one thing is having political analysis. Anyone can do that. In fact, I'm doing it on YouTube. But what really counts ultimately is whether your political analysis and your commentary has any sort of predictive value. How does what you say end up manifesting in reality? Because to me, that is proof that whether what you say, and you can bring up all the talking points that you want about the left, leftist talking points in general. You can be anti-imperialist, you can be anti-neoliberalism, you can be anti-big pharma, anti-corporations, anti-establishment media. All this doesn't matter if your analysis of these problems can't create a road map towards that future that we all want. So I'm going to show a video which was a 2016 debate between Jimmy Dore and probably his biggest political opponent, Sam Seder, of the Majority Report. And this is the last time that they had any public encounter, and there's a good reason why. Because this video is incredibly humiliating for Jimmy Dore. And it's even more humiliating now, because the reason that I'm showing this video from 2016 is because everything that was spoken in this video has now been proven right or wrong. And unsurprisingly, Jimmy Dore got everything wrong. So if you value political analysis, not for the sake of political analysis or commentary, because anyone can do commentary, but if you value it because of its predictive powers, its forecasting ability, then you will see here why Jimmy Dore is just completely wrong about everything he stands for. So let's watch the video and enjoy. And for context, because in 2016, I also didn't follow much YouTube content, to be honest. So I didn't know who Sam Seder was. I didn't know who Jimmy Dore was. I didn't know, obviously, what their political positions were. I suspect, I'm not going to go back and view everything that Jimmy Dore said back in 2016. I assume by the context of this video that Jimmy Dore was supportive of the third party, the Green Party, and therefore was not planning on voting for Hillary Clinton. This video was made before the 2016 election, and basically Jimmy Dore's position on that election was they're both awful. A vote for Hillary Clinton was a vote for neoliberalism, foreign policy, warmongering, etc. No one in good faith could vote for Hillary Clinton. And on top of that, voting for a third party, even if this led to a Trump victory, was eventually going to lead to a lot of positive changes for the left. Basically, the destruction of the Republican Party, which he mentions at length in this video, and we're going to discuss what's wrong about his views, and also the hope that in the long run, we would get a real leftist running, say in 2020, which by now is obvious that didn't happen. But let's watch this, and it's cringe. I'll admit it's cringe, because he gets everything wrong. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can all laugh together. So, trigger warning for Jimmy Dore fans. This video will show how your leftist idol, this icon, this guy who shouts loudest than anyone else, really doesn't have a leg to stand on.
All right, Jimmy. So
Yeah.
I mean, what's your response? I haven't gotten to the other parts yet, but
No, I think, first of all, Sam, just because you've been right up to this point doesn't mean I'm still not pissed off at you.
well, I mean,
I love how this debate basically starts by him admitting that he's been wrong about everything, but yeah.
we had this debate, and to watch this, I mean, it really is upsetting to me, because
Now,
Go
let
ahead.
me just say, your point about the Supreme Court, my position on the Supreme Court is that right now, like you said, he's not your first.
So, some context again. One of the best reasons, I would say the best reason to have supported Hillary Clinton, no matter how bad she was as a candidate, was that if Hillary Clinton had won, the Democrats would have gotten the various Supreme Court picks rather than Republicans. So, on that basis alone, voting for Hillary Clinton rather than voting for a third-party candidate, which would have raised the risk of Trump winning that election, which he eventually did, was, to me, and I think to any sensible human being, the best reason. Because in the U.S., Supreme Court justices, as you know, they're not up for re-election. They serve their term for life. So having numerous picks during any presidential administration, and at this time there were two people who were very close to retirement, would plus a carryover pick from the Obama administration, because the Republicans blocked Obama from picking a nominee, which was Merrick Garland. So this would have, there was the real risk was that three people for the Supreme Court would have been picked under Trump. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So, a friendly reminder, these are the three people who are now Supreme Court justices, and they were picked during the Trump administration. So this ended up happening. Of course, for Jimmy Dore, that did not matter.
Joyce, I'm with you on that. I'll just say this right now, the Republicans aren't even giving a guy who they called a perfect choice, right? They loved him, right? Orrin Hatch said he'd be the best choice, and then they won't even give him a hearing or a meeting without batting an eye for a year. This is the argument we had before. So why wouldn't the Democrats, let's say if Donald Trump nominates a maniac, why wouldn't they say, no, why don't you nominate Merrick Garland?
well, Jimmy,
And
this was the next thing
and
I
then-
was going to get to. I understand. You're saying, why can't the
Okay.
Democrats do this?
Right.
You said on the tape here that the Republicans are filibustering. They're not filibustering.
No, they're not filibustering. That was you correct. You corrected
The
correctly on that.
Democrats,
They're not.
the Democrats, there is no one who has ever even speculated that it's possible for Donald Trump to win the presidency and for the Democrats to take back the Senate. Those two things cannot happen. And so the Democrats don't have the ability to not provide a hearing for Donald Trump's nominee. There's no way the Republicans are going to go 4 years without a hearing on. They can maybe get away with this with Obama, and they can play out the clock for 6 or 7 months because there's a huge presidential election going on, so the media has been distracted somewhat. But I can tell you that in January, there's only going to be one story. Maybe there'll be two. One will be how, if Hillary Clinton's the president, one will be how the Republicans are threatening to shut down the government again. And the other one will be they're refusing to hold hearings for her nominee. And that will just go on because there's not going to be anything else that's going on. It's going to be a fundamentally different media era. So I don't think they're going to be able to hold out for 4 years. And Democrats certainly wouldn't be able to hold out for 4 years because they don't believe in the destruction of the Senate as an institution in the way that the Republicans do. And frankly, I'm glad about that.
Okay,
So the irony of Jimmy Dore's position is that on one hand, the Democratic establishment is so weak and spineless on everything else, but somehow they will grow a spine magically and find a way of derailing Trump's Supreme Court nominations for at least 2 years, in the hope that in 2018 they would end up recovering the Senate, which, as Sam Seder will explain, would be very unlikely, and in the event didn't happen.
Here's my theory. I'll just give you my theory, is that if the Republicans can do this to a guy like Merrick Garland, that they've already said is a great justice, for a whole year without batting an eye and paying no political price for it, I say the Democrats will be able to filibuster someone that Donald Trump nominated. And then in 2 years, the Senate, in my opinion, it would flip to Republican just because of, I agree with Chris Hayes when he says that if Donald Trump becomes president, it's the destruction of the Republican Party. And Paul Ryan is not going to usher any of his crazy policies through Congress. So,
so two things here. The first is, it is really hilarious that someone who defines himself as basically against the establishment media, and by this I mean like the liberal centrist establishment media, you know, the MSNBCs, the CNN, that's the reason that people watch someone like Jimmy Dore, because they don't want to get their news from the establishment media, which is admittedly crap. So I find it really hilarious that his notion, and he's going to repeat this over and over in this debate, his idea that the Republican Party is going to self-destruct if it votes for Trump, that he got this from Chris Hayes from MSNBC, which admittedly Chris Hayes is probably like the least detestable of the establishment media pundits. He's probably like more closet leftist than he might appear on screen. So yeah, he's the least worst of a really bad bunch. But he's still part of MSNBC. He's still part of the establishment media. So I really find it hilarious that Jimmy Dore bases his idea of the Republicans self-destructing, which again did not happen. If anything, Trump molded the Republican Party in his image. So it did not self-destruct in any way. It became worse. It remained as powerful, if not more powerful than before. But it became worse. He turned it into essentially a fascist party, you know, an openly anti-science, anti-institutional party during his presidency. So that obviously didn't happen. But the other thing that he mentions of like Paul Ryan, well, guess what ended up happening? Paul Ryan ended up designing Trump's tax reform. That's the Trump tax cuts. That is Paul Ryan right there. He was the architect of this. So that's hilarious that he thinks that this wouldn't have happened when it literally did. Again, that is Paul Ryan right there. There you go. It's insane. Insane. So far, everything that he said, like the exact opposite has happened.
They fracture and the Senate flips to Democrat. They were saying it was almost going to happen this year. But,
yeah, but you know the difference between, I mean, Jimmy, surely you know the difference between how many Senate Republicans are running for re-election this year versus 2 years from now, right? You know the difference, right? We have 2/3 of the race is our Senate's Republicans up for a race, and in 2 years we have 2 times the number of Democrats who are up for re-election. So the idea of the Democrats taking back the Senate in 2018 is an extreme long shot. The idea that Paul Ryan may not pursue any of Donald Trump's crazy legislation, but he will pursue Paul Ryan's crazy legislation. And Donald Trump will surely sign it. Why wouldn't he?
That's exactly what happened. Literally exactly what happened. And the Democrats did not take the Senate in 2018, in large part precisely because of what Sam Seder now described. There was a much higher number of Democrats up for re-election and therefore liable to lose, which compared to what happened in 2020 when they had, you know, this was still a long shot, but they managed. So if they couldn't do it in 2018, they just couldn't, it wouldn't have happened, period.
Okay, so
you're going to let Paul Ryan, would you want Paul Ryan to be president? This guy wants to privatize Medicare. He wants to privatize Social Security. He wants to cut any type of social safety net. He wants to get rid of the estate taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, why is his agenda any better than Donald Trump's? Even if you believe Donald Trump is not even going to do anything except for sign legislation, that's bad enough.
Yeah, Sam, we're on the same side most things. I'll just disagree with
Jimmy,
you.
no, wait a second. No, we're not. Because
What
politically...
I mean, except for Hillary Clinton in the Supreme Court. We disagree 100% on that. And I think that if Donald Trump is president, it's way worse for the Republicans. And if Hillary Clinton is... I agree with Chris Hayes when he says Hillary Clinton is good for the Republican Party and Donald Trump is bad for it. I agree with him.
I agree with that, too. But in the meantime, we have a Supreme Court that is going to be moved to the right for generations. In the
I disagree
meantime...
with you on that. I mean, you haven't given me an argument that rebuts what I said. That the Democrats could easily filibuster any bad appointee, and they could say, hey, until you give us someone as good as Merrick Garland, we're going to keep filibustering this. And all we have to do is do it for 2 years. And my proof that they could do it is that the Republicans are doing it to a guy like Merrick Garland, who they already said they liked without batting an eye for a year. So I just disagree with you on this, Sam, on the Supreme Court.
So the reason that the Republicans ended up sort of flipping on Merrick Garland is because, well, they saw that there was an election coming up. And if they could defer that pick until after the election and hopefully win that election, then they could pick someone who was much more to the right than Merrick Garland, which in the event paid off. And this idea, again, is so crazy, I think, from like an outsider's perspective, that in the US that Supreme Court justices last for their entire lifetime. I think that needs a major reform. Because you end up with, in the end, Trump had 3 picks. And he pushed 3 right-leaning, some much more conservative than others. But all these, these 3 were clearly more right-wing than Merrick Garland was. And they're young. That's the shocking thing. They're really, really young. Amy Coney Barrett is 49 years old. That's really young to be a Supreme Court justice. Neil Gorsuch, he might look older because of his gray hair, but he's also really young. He's in his early 50s. And Brett Kavanaugh is also in his 50s. So they're not going away anytime soon. And that was the real risk of that election, that you could end up with a Supreme Court that would lean conservative, heavily conservative, for a generation. Something that clearly Jimmy Dore did not have an answer for, on why he would not support Hillary Clinton. This is really like a doomsday scenario for the Supreme Court, and it ended up happening.
And what about when Justice Breyer or Justice Ginsburg pass away or retire?
Yeah, I mean,
so they're going to filibuster. They're going to prevent 2 vacancies from being filled. And then you think, based on that in the context of American society as you know it, without a presidential election going on, that the Democrats are going to retake the Senate, even though they have twice as many people up for re-election.
I mean, Sam, did you think that Hillary Clinton was a stronger candidate than Bernie Sanders against the Republicans?
No.
You didn't? You always thought Bernie Sanders was a stronger candidate than Hillary Clinton against the Republicans?
Yeah. I mean, particularly against Donald Trump.
Oh, I thought I had you on that one. God damn it.
He's so bad at gotchas, like so bad. And that's often a problem with people when you refuse, when you think you're like more left than anyone else, then your natural starting point for thinking of someone else's political views is that they're basically right-winger, And Sam Seder, he's definitely not the most left among online leftists, far from it. He's basically, a standard social democrat. He's not anti-capitalist in any way. He's not socialist. So no, he's not as left as much of the online left. But he's still very much, he's basically a Bernie Sanders supporter, like that kind of social democracy. Because in terms of policy, most of Bernie Sanders' policies were social democratic. They weren't like outright socialist. Just one, I think, which was his plan for having employee ownership of up to 20% of a firm. That was definitely a socialist policy. But as for everything else, nothing that Bernie Sanders ever stood for would be incompatible with like your standard European social democratic party, and many even center-right European parties. So yeah, it's crazy. Just like, again, this mindset of, well, if they're not as left as me, they must be right wing, and that is what I get all the time from Jimmy Dore, and from Jimmy Dore supporters, who I've had numerous engagement with on Twitter, and basically like their go-to insult to anyone who isn't a rabid Jimmy Dore cultist supporter is, "You're a shit lib," or just, if they're not up for insults that day, just, you're a liberal. That's their insult. Anything to the right of them is basically conservative. And by liberal, I mean, the term they're using it for is to describe a right-winger. So, yeah, that was such an embarrassing attempt at a gotcha that failed.
So I was trying to impugn your forecasting ability. I'm saying I don't agree with that forecast. You're saying, what if there's 2 justices? What if there's 3 justices? I'm saying, as it stands right now, the Republicans aren't even giving a hearing to a guy they say is great for a year. Why can't the Democrats do the same thing, Sam? Why can't they filibuster a bad... Why can't they filibuster...
So another problem with leftists of the Jimmy Dore persuasion is their complete inability to separate the is from the ought. So they will argue things like, this ought to happen. The Democrats ought to filibuster whatever Trump's Supreme Court picks are. But that's not based on reality. Again, this really falls flat when you see what Jimmy Dore thinks of the Democratic Party as a whole, being essentially corporatists and neoliberals. Suddenly they will magically grow this spine and magically filibuster Donald Trump's Supreme Court appointment. That's ridiculous. That's just not consistent with how he himself describes the Democratic Party. It's not consistent.
I don't know. Why can't I fly? Because I don't have wings. I mean, the fact is, Jimmy, is that you are taking. I mean, the what you're talking about. There's no. You're just positing things to happen. That is like, it's like dropping a marble down a pachinko ladder and just saying like, well, if it hits here and it hits there and it hits there, it's going to land here. But the fact is, none of those things can logically follow each other.
I 100% disagree with you.
Well, I know.
What do you say about the point that Chris Hayes made and Ben Howe made from Red State? They're both in agreement that Ben Howe is telling people, his conservative friends, to vote for Hillary if they care about the safety or the life of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. Because if Donald Trump is president, it wrecks it, and they won't be able to get a governing majority, he said, for maybe decades. So you can vote for Hillary Clinton. I'm going to vote for the destruction of the Republican Party, as according to Chris Hayes and Ben Howe.
Well, I think Chris Hayes would tell you to vote for Hillary Clinton. And
I
Ben
know,
Howe,
but he's going against his own logic.
I don't think he is. I suspect that maybe you're just misinterpreting what he's saying. Do I think that Donald Trump is bad for the conservative party? I mean, the conservative movement? Yes. I think he's bad for the conservative movement, whether he wins or loses. Is it bad for the Republican Party if he wins? I'll tell you what happens if he wins. What he wins is like people like Ben Howe lose. They lose their job. But there are other people who win. And those people will continue on, and they will just continue. It's not like the Republican Party is going to say, oh, what's become of us? I mean, look at the way they're reacting now.
Pretty much. You don't even have to get to Donald Trump to realize this. Like, if you think of like how the Republican Party was sort of in the pre-Reagan era and see what it's turned into now, or even in the Reagan era, how George W. Bush behaved, you would think like, oh my God, this is not the Republican Party of my parents or my grandparents. So the Republican Party has been very successful at molding itself, and the Democrats as well, because they would have been appalled, in 1950s, 60s era, Democrat would see the degree of plutocracy that the current Democratic Party supports, and they'd also be a bit appalled at just how brazen it is. So, whether we talk about the transformation post-Reagan or how they've behaved under the Bush administration, or how they turned into essentially an extreme, a far-right party under Trump and under Trumpism. That's what happened. Conservatism wasn't destroyed. It transformed. And that's, again, the point that Sam Seder, I think, is making. And this idea that the conservative movement would self-destruct under Trump clearly didn't happen. It didn't happen.
Yes, I agree. So in my idea, just let me clarify that idea of people coalescing. I mean that if Hillary Clinton is president, like right now, Barack Obama's president, he's pushing the TPP, which you pointed out, a lot of Democrats are against, right?
Right.
For context, for those who forgot what the PPP was, it was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that big Pacific free trade agreement, which ironically was not about trade. I mean, trade was just one component. There was a lot of other very pro-corporate components that were very disturbing about it. It was very unpopular, and I think one of the few things that Trump did that was unequivocally good was getting rid of it, scrapping it almost immediately. I think it was like the first week or like the first day, but it was very quick.
Yet there's a chance he still might get it through, which is why he's pushing for it, because he knows there's a chance.
Well,
so
he wants it to go through. That's why he's pushing it. He knows that it's in trouble. That's why he's having to work so hard. And frankly, I think that I think there's plenty of evidence that it's not going to happen, at the very least on his watch.
Yeah, that's good news, right? So,
yes,
So my point is, he helped split the opposition. Like the Democrats are like, wait a minute, my Democrat president's for this. This is some horrible right-wing policy, though. That's what I've been told. But he's for. So it splits. If it was a Republican proposing this, all the Democrats would coalesce. All the independents.
If it was a Republican proposing this, it would have passed already because they control both houses of Congress, and it would have passed.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. My theory.
Do you refute that?
Do I refute that it would have already
If the
passed
president, if it was George Bush or Donald Trump right now, and you had a Republican Senate and a Republican House, that the TPP wouldn't pass? The reason why the TPP is not going to come up for a vote in the lame duck session is because it's Obama trade.
Right. So you're saying the Republicans don't want to be seen going along with anything Barack Obama does.
Right.
So you're saying that a Democrat pushing the TPP is not as bad as a Republican pushing the TPP, so we should vote Democrat.
Well, I don't think Hillary Clinton's going to push the TPP.
Honestly?
Yeah. I think it's too toxic for her at this point. I think there's too many people in the Democratic Party who are going to do it. And frankly, if you have a Republican-controlled Senate and House, yes, it's better for a Democrat to push the TPP because they're not going to give Hillary trade either. They're going to follow the exact same strategy they followed with Obama, which is obstruct. So in the same dynamic that prevented Barack Obama from cutting Social Security benefits because the Republican Party wouldn't go along with him, and then ultimately the Democratic Party got strengthened and they completely changed their position on it by 180 degrees. That is what I expect that dynamic to continue.
Yes, I remember when George Bush also proposed privatizing Social Security, and it was dead on arrival because...
Well, privatizing Social Security is far more extreme than simply cutting benefits.
Right.
But I'm in favor of expanding benefits, and the Democratic Party is now, that's the official position of the Democratic Party and all of the Democrats in the Senate.
Right. Did you know since Bernie endorsed her, Hillary stopped talking about climate change in her speeches? You know, she's exporting fracking around the world. She says the Republicans don't accept the science of climate change. She says she does. And we all know the science says that fracking is way worse for climate change than anyone believes.
So here's a common Jimmy Dore tactic. Whenever he's cornered, and he clearly is at this point, he'll just bring up another leftist talking point. Fracking, or imperialism, or something that he knows is gonna get, the blood flowing among the, his supporters, who basically just care about the talking point. They don't care about the practicalities of how to achieve that talking point, whether there's a coherent roadmap to get there. They don't care about that. They just want someone who is screaming, and admittedly not in this video, but he's gone off the rails on numerous occasions, and all they want is someone who screams louder than anyone else all these talking points: anti-imperialism, anti-neoliberalism, big pharma, fracking, all that. That is all they care about. And yes, we all care about these things. We want them to not exist. But I want to listen to someone who actually has a way to achieve this. And from what we've seen so far in this video, nothing that Jimmy Dore has said ended up happening. So why should I trust someone who has such terrible capability for political forecasting? How do I have a guarantee that anything he says towards achieving these goals will happen in the way that he describes his method of achieving them? None at all. That's why I think he is such an empty vessel for leftism, because all he is a mouthpiece for repeating these talking points without any substance behind them. And this is painfully obvious in this debate. Very painful. Like, if you're a Jimmy Dore fan and you haven't seen this debate, you will be in full cringe mode right now.
And yet here she is exporting it. So that's the kind of thing, the doublespeak, that people can't give their vote to. I can't give my vote to that, Sam.
So you're going to enable the guy who thinks that climate change is a hoax because you think that's going to get us further down the line?
No. I think it's time for a revolution, and we have to throw off the neoliberal agenda, which is pro-fracking, which is anti-climate change and anti-science.
See what I mean? He can't answer that point. So what do we do? Neoliberalism? Yeah, anti-fracking? Yeah, revolution. I need to plug in the word revolution there. That's all he does. That is all he does. And, I broadly speaking, agree with some of the ideas that, Hillary Clinton was objectively horrible. In many areas of policy, the Democrats are not that much better than Republicans. On climate change, yes, I don't think the Democrat establishment is nearly as forward-looking as it should be. I don't think they're very progressive. But there's a difference of at least, not making the situation any worse the way that Republicans, as it ended up happening, in derailing environmental regulations, which they did end up doing. And that surely this is an absolute fact. If Hillary Clinton had won, that wouldn't have happened. So, on the environment, Republicans are, objectively speaking, much worse than Democrats. Much, much worse. And his inability to reconcile this idea of you can have one bad and one worse. That worse does not endorse the bad. Okay? It just means that for practical purposes, one is less damaging in the long run than the other. And on climate change, I think that matters even more, because we have very little time to make moves, important moves, to prevent a climate crisis. Well, we already are in a climate crisis, but prevent, irreversible climate damage. So these things do matter. It does matter. We can't wait, you can't waste 4 years of an administration that actually moves, if the Democrats simply aren't moving forward as fast as we would want. You do not want an administration that literally moves back on an issue like this.
And we are going to have to right now.
Do you think Donald Trump would have okayed the Keystone Pipeline?
Yes.
Me too. Do you think Donald Trump will do that when he gets into office?
Yes. I think he'll do all the bad things you can think of. I think
so
that,
why would you not why would you
to,
not want to put someone in who's in position who is going to be relying on your votes to get reelected, who's going to have to address Bernie Sanders as a powerful senator in her own party? Why would you not want that person who is closer to, even if you think that she's a horrible human being who is going to continue to wreck the planet, and you and I, maybe we agree on that. Why would you not want that person in charge, because they are more accountable to Bernie Sanders and Bill McKibben and to the Democrats in the House who are against these things than Donald Trump, who could give F all about those people and in fact benefits politically from telling them to go F off.
Right, and my reason is because I'm playing a longer game. I see that we obstruct Trump.
How much time do you think we have?
2 years.
2 years?
2 years, and then 2 years we flip. By the way, and people are forgetting, that they're going to be redoing the gerrymandering based on the census that's coming up, right?
Why do you think the Democrats are going to control the state houses?
No, they're not. That's what I'm saying. That what's happened is that when Barack Obama was president, that people vote against him. A midterm election, it goes against the incumbency. So that's what people
more often than not, but not in 2002.
Okay, so
So it's really funny that he brings up the gerrymandering and then kind of like forgets that he does so, because obviously I think at that moment he forgot that he needed to have democratic state legislatures, because it's the state legislatures in the U.S. that determine the redistricting following a census. So it doesn't really matter who's the president at that time. It matters who is in control of the state legislatures. But look, here's the thing. I'm an economist, and the best way to tell whether a theory is bullshit is on how many assumptions it rests upon. The more assumptions that you need for your theory to be valid, the more bullshit it probably is. So for all of Jimmy Dore's for Jimmy Dore's plan, his grand plan for achieving leftism in America, he needs 3 things to happen, all 3 of which are completely preposterous, which means having all 3 of them, so individually they're preposterous, but having all 3 of them happen is even more preposterous, right? So he needs, because probabilities multiply. So he needs, first and foremost, for the Democrats to successfully filibuster his Supreme Court, not Trump's Supreme Court nominees. Subsequently, they need to win the Senate in 2018, and then somehow also control state legislatures. So none of these things happened in reality, which points to the fact that individually they were highly unrealistic, much less assuming that they all had to happen. Like, this is the biggest sign that you are dealing with someone who hasn't really thought, who's just spouting nonsense. He hasn't thought of the road plan. He hasn't at all, because you're just making silly assumption after silly assumption after silly assumption, and assuming not just that any one of them will happen, you're assuming they all happen. That is insane. That is how you can spot the bullshit.
My point being that I don't think a Democratic presidency helps fix any of the problems we really need to fix. In fact, it makes a lot of them worse. And the Democrats got in bed with
So
Wall
let me
Street,
ask you
Sam.
this. If Bernie Sanders was the nominee, Jimmy, would you continue to espouse this? Because, of course, this would mean the end of the Republican Party as we know it in the conservative movement. So would you also not vote if Bernie Sanders was the nominee?
No, because Bernie Sanders isn't a neoliberal. I'm saying that people don't realize what they're getting with Hillary is not the opposite.
But
of
your
Donald
theory,
Trump.
your theory of Donald Trump is that the reason why you would enable his presidency is because it's going to destroy the conservative movement. I mean, so why? It's short term. I mean, why wouldn't you espouse this if it's only going to be 2 years and we can weather the storm and the Democrats could? Why would you support Bernie Sanders?
Well, it's a risk assessment, right? So right now.
This was such a good gotcha, like such a good gotcha, because it's completely, if the argument, which again it's his Chris Hayes and MSNBC argument, and remember that all of the liberal establishment media had ended up having Trump derangement syndrome. So this was like their fantasy world of the destruction of the Republican Party because of how insane Trump was, rather than assume that the Republican Party was going to mold itself into Trumpism. This is a really good gotcha, because I would think that, hey, the destruction of the Republican Party is a really good thing, above anything else. I would love it if, conservatism was destroyed the way that he's describing that it's going to be destroyed and be rendered unelectable. And consider that in 2016, Bernie Sanders, had he become the president, would have faced a much more difficult time of passing his agenda. So he would have faced a hostile Senate, and there's no guarantee that a lot of his agenda would have passed. He definitely faced, at least when you take the Supreme Court out of the picture, a much more favorable outlook in 2020, because the Democrats ended up winning both houses. But at the time, there would have been a real risk that Bernie's agenda would not have passed. So, people would have been discontented by his brand of democratic socialism, and it would have probably caused disenchantment, and who knows, we would have probably had another right-winger win in 20... Well, you would have, not another, because we're assuming that Trump didn't win, but you might have had Trump win in 2020, or some other crazy Republican. Or you would also have had a Democratic establishment that, hey, see, we told you socialism wasn't going to work. Come back to us, good old neolibs who get things done. So, yeah. I mean, this is such a bad argument on Jimmy Dore's part, and that was a really good gotcha.
If my choices are Donald Trump or neoliberal, warmongering Hillary Clinton in bed with Wall Street crackers and the big pharma, I'm going to say the risk, I'll take that risk. So
again, just listen to all this diatribe. Big pharma, neoliberal, imperialism, warmongering, bombing here. This is just mental diarrhea. And you always hear it from Jimmy Dore. When he's cornered, that's what he But when he can't answer like a point on political practicality, he just falls back on just vague ideology and rambling, because, my the practical way in which I can achieve this goal has been debunked because it's idiotic. My only retort to that is basically, but neoliberalism, that's all he falls back on. And it is really sad that so many people, and I think a lot of his fan base is very young and very naive, and just sees him as being this champion of all these values that, broadly speaking, all leftists believe in. We're all against U.S. and Western imperialism. We're all against neoliberalism. We're all against big pharma. We're all against fracking. Yeah, but if you don't have a practical way of achieving this, and in fact, if your roadmap to this goal involves getting Trump into power, like, how ridiculous is this? How ridiculous is this?
Of Donald Trump destroying the Republican Party, but if I get a real progressive that the country is behind, and he can raise awareness and consciousness about what it means to be a real socialist, that we're the richest country the face of the earth has ever seen, and we can afford universal health care, and we can afford a college for everybody, and we can regulate Wall Street and have a good economy, I'll take that bet. That's my risk assessment there. But if my risk...
By the way, Bernie Sanders basically achieved this without even being president. He achieved this conscientization of the American public in ways that no other American politician could do before him. The idea that something like universal health care is now a major political issue, that was not a thing before 2016. Most Americans just thought this didn't happen in the US. So it's amazing what he pulled off. And he did this without being president. So this isn't, contrary to what he's saying, this wasn't a requirement. Bernie Sanders becoming president wasn't a requirement for these things to become incredibly popular, not just by Democratic voters, but also Republican voters, because things like Medicare for All are supported by a majority of Republicans.
If my choices are Hillary and Donald, I'm going to get a different risk.
And so you have basically said that the Supreme Court is irrelevant in this assessment too, right?
No,
because let me just get this clear. Because the Democrats are going to filibuster for 2 years, then the Democrats are going to take over the Senate, and then they're going to continue to filibuster for another 2 years. And because of the collapse of the Republican Party, we're going to get a Democrat that you can support. Who might that be? Do you have an idea 4 years out who the Democrat you're going to support for president is? Or is it going to be Jill Stein?
Sure, I like Elizabeth Warren.
Okay, so you think Elizabeth Warren is going to run 4 years, and she's going to get elected, and then everything's going to be fine.
By the way, Elizabeth Warren, who ended up being not as progressive as she originally presented herself as. That was his choice for 2020. Okay.
Plan?
Sam, my plan is to filibuster any bad nominees that Donald Trump nominates, and we come to a compromise. Hey,
so you think the Democrats can maintain a filibuster over the course of those 4 years if there's 2 vacancies or 3 vacancies?
You think that Donald Trump can keep nominating maniacs to the Supreme Court who isn't a compromised judge? Why can't we force him to nominate a compromised judge? Why wouldn't we put the pressure on him? By the way, you act like
I would just say,
scandals.
Thomas,
There will be constant
Alito,
scandals,
Roberts.
constant scandals surrounding Donald Trump. He will be the most ineffective president. This whole idea that somehow he will be equal standing when he nominates someone to the Supreme Court is ridiculous. They're gonna rip him a new one every time he does something. He will be over scrutinized. Hillary won't be as scrutinized.
You're going to have a Democratic Senate and Congress for 2 years. They're going to be able to pass every single piece of legislation they want.
And yes, Trump was incredibly scrutinized. And did that impede anything? No. Trump derangement syndrome in the establishment media every single day, 24 hours. 24/7, 365, that was MSNBC, that was CNN. In fact, they scrutinized Trump so much that they overdid it, which was Russiagate. So all of this happened and ended up benefiting Trump, not the Democrats, not any future progressive leftists who could potentially become president. So Jimmy Dore, up to this point, and we're at the slightly past the halfway mark, has gotten everything wrong. None of his predictions occurred. What does that tell you?
You're saying
Republican.
in 2 years, well,
You're going to have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican
for 2
president.
years.
For 2 years.
For 2 years. Yeah, I know that this is my risk assessment. My risk assessment is that when Donald Trump proposes crazy stuff, we can coalesce, we can block him. Also, that the Democrats can filibuster horrible stuff in the Senate. I'm saying fight, don't give in.
Okay.
See, that's the language of the spouting the talking points, revolution, we need to fight. It's a fight with no training. It's like, just get in the ring because you have to fight. But forget about the training, which you really need. And perhaps you will realize after training that actually this opponent might still beat the shit out of you. So maybe you're not going to fight this time around. You're going to fight later when you've trained more, when you have a better idea. That is the logic that Jimmy Dore fans don't get. That's what he doesn't get. And that's really the whole point. Like, the biggest accusation against Jimmy Dore is really that he's a grifter, that he isn't really convinced about what he says ideologically or practically speaking. He just says what guarantees will get more blood boiling among his supporters. And there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know if he's genuinely a leftist or not. I think he probably is, but although less so now than he was before, because I think now he cozies up too much to a lot of right-wing talking points that might share some overlap, but he does it without any criticism of what those talking points entail if you end up agreeing all the time with the right on certain issues. But I think at least in this point in time, he was genuine. But he's just someone who doesn't have that way of achieving, that his brain doesn't function in ways, because he doesn't think with his brain. He thinks with his gut, and he thinks with his ass.
Well, I mean, you've made your case.
It doesn't sound. I mean, Sam, I understand we disagree, and I could be wrong. I'm saying this is my risk.
No, Jimmy, you're wrong.
I don't think it's because I don't understand.
Yeah, it is.
Because I don't understand what's going on.
It is because because the idea that Peter Thiel and Merrick Garland would rule the same and there would be no demonstrable difference is absurd. It's absurd, Jimmy. I'm sorry. It's absurd.
That's
absurd.
not my idea. That's not. I don't know. I agree. I don't even know who Peter Thiel is that much. So that's not my idea. I'm not trying to throw my friend Steve under the bus, but that's not my.
I don't know why they brought in Peter Thiel to this discussion, but for context, he's that techno-libertarian douchebag who has some really abhorrent views. I don't know if he was ever considered for a Supreme Court justice position, but yeah, that's who Peter Thiel is.
My main point, and I'll concede that point, that Peter Thiel, I don't even know who he is really.
The idea that the Democrats are going to take back the Senate and are going to be able to filibuster for 2 years, and assuming that no other vacancy opens up, also ignores all of the political history of the history of this country. I've never heard of a 2-year failure to fill a Supreme Court seat, and certainly not during a time where there's no other news, and not during a time where the Republicans are going to control both houses. I'm sorry, it's absurd. It's absurd.
You know what I never
it's a screenplay.
You know what else I never heard of? Is that war crimes being ordered at the top of government and nobody prosecuting them. I never heard of that.
You've never heard of that? Because that has been basically the history of this country.
I never heard of our government suspending habeas corpus, which is in the Magna Carta. They did that. I couldn't believe what they did.
Under a Republican president with Republican justices.
I can't believe we have a surveillance state right now. I can't believe you want me to vote for a candidate who was full-throated supporting going in and destabilizing the Middle East.
No, Jimmy, wait, Jimmy, I don't want you to vote for anybody.
See what I mean? When he has no other recourse, just bring in the imperialism, the neoliberalism. This is a warmonger. He's going to bomb. That's it. That's what he falls back on. That's what they all fall back on, because they have no substance. They have no substance. And guess what? Leftism, real leftism, isn't just repeating these talking points ad nauseum. It isn't just like flying the banner of being anti-imperialist or anti-neoliberal. It means having concrete ideas of how to achieve what you say you want to achieve. If you cannot have this, if you cannot propose anything, then this is all just completely vacuous. And that's what Jimmy Dore is. And that's what Jimmy Dore fans are. They don't think. They have no way of achieving what they want to achieve. None whatsoever. And they just think that the louder you say it, the more likely it's going to magically come true. And here you have a case, and this is the reason why I'm doing this video. Here you have a case of a guy who got everything wrong. Literally his plan on how to achieve a progressive left government completely fell apart. And you're seeing every single point of his, every single political forecast of him didn't happen. None of this happened.
I don't want you to listen. No, Jimmy, you're missing my point. I don't want you to vote. I don't care who you vote for. You live in California. What I want you to do is to stop offering theories about politics on your platform that are bogus, that are not
I think I just proved to you they're not bogus, Sam. You haven't proved that they're bogus at all, except that you said it. I think I just kind of showed you how you're wrong about all this stuff, and you're voting out of fear again. Out of fear. Oh, because there might be 2 Supreme Court judges. What if there's 3? What if the moon falls into Lake Michigan? What are we going to do then?
Now, Jimmy, let's talk about risk assessment. Do you think there's...
I think voting by fear is very legitimate. Like, you could be really terrified of who could come into power. I think that is completely legitimate. Like, you can't discard fear as a motivating factor, as a rational choice on how to vote by any stretch of the imagination.
The difference in the probability that 2 80-year-olds with multiple cases of cancer are going to serve out their term versus the moon falling into Lake Michigan?
I just disagree with your forecasting, Sam. I don't agree with it. I think it's a bigger risk.
Do you want to look at actuarial tables for the life expectancy of an 80-year-old man who's had multiple cancers?
Sam, I can right now get you a great deal on term life insurance, and you know that's the best insurance there is.
I have term.
See, you know it. Sam, this is about me being better looking, isn't it?
I mean, listen, it's not funny to me, and that's the problem. Is that it is not funny to me. I think it's really dangerous. What is dangerous? That people vote their conscience? No, I think what's dangerous is, honestly, is using your platform and espousing fantastical notions that I think that could be really detrimental to the lives of literally millions of people.
Did you say this about MSNBC when they were pushing the Hillary Clinton candidacy?
Yeah.
Did you say that they were irresponsible?
Yeah. Well, I disagreed with them.
Okay, but you didn't say they were just irresponsible and reckless and all that stuff to use their platform to tell people to vote for Hillary Clinton?
I don't watch it that often. The only show I watch is Hayes, and I don't think he was doing that.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that if somehow somebody disagrees with you to the left, they're irresponsible.
You're not disagreeing with me to the left. You're not disagreeing with me. We're not disagreeing on ideology. We're disagreeing on the way politics works. We're disagreeing on tactics.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the people who disagree with me gave us frickin' Hillary Clinton. Geniuses. Fucking geniuses, Sam. So anybody who's supporting someone who gave full-throated support to the Iraq War, I don't need your advice on how to vote.
Okay, here's another issue that I have with the brand of leftism that Jimmy Dore promotes, is this idea that there can be no way of reconciling two similar positions with any agent that you despise. So the establishment media, which indeed helped push the case for the Iraq War, I cannot have any position that is the same as what they have. Like, if your neurons can't function in ways that you can reconcile this idea, then there's something really wrong with you, because this isn't really hard. Like, I can still say that the establishment media is terrible, that they are guilty of some really, really bad political choices, and they contributed to some very, very awful things, like supporting the Iraq War, while at the same time agreeing with them on a certain issue. This isn't hard. This really isn't hard. And if you find it hard, then try and think why.
Well, I'm not advising you on how to vote, Jimmy.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to anybody.
Well, I mean, but you can make this about, about your own personal affront that you feel and insults that you feel. But that's not what it's about.
It is insulting that anybody who is for somebody other than the main two parties is try to dismiss them, or you try to marginalize them. Not you, but you also, yes. But the mainstream establishment press also does that. They're still calling Jill Stein. She's in bed with Putin now, and she's anti-vax. All this stuff. It's the same thing they did to Bernie. Bernie was a sexist. Bernie was a misogynist. It's just ridiculous, right? So you get to vote for a third party. That's what democracy is all about, Sam. You get to have a choice. And this idea that you can't vote for a third party until a lot of people are already voting for it is an F argument, okay? And there's a reason why we don't have justice for it.
People can vote. Nobody, listen, you're making the same argument that right-wingers make. Like, you're trying to censor my speech. You can vote any way you want.
Sam, again,
this is all about some type of personal affront, and I don't care. I don't care about anybody's feelings in this. I don't care if people feel marginalized.
Right.
I don't care. It's not what this is about.
Well, I know it's about that you feel like somebody who has a different political opinion. Everybody who's in the Green Party is reckless to you.
No, that's not the case.
Just me?
No, I don't think that you're reckless because of your support of the Green Party. I think you're reckless because of the way that you're articulating tactics and the idea that you're dismissive of the Supreme Court, and you're basically not providing any context for the plan that you have, that this is going to long-term work out well for people. I mean, just in the past 5 months, we've seen the importance of having even a split Supreme Court in terms of enfranchising hundreds of thousands of voters, in terms of maintaining the existence of public sector unions. I mean,
Sam, I agree with you on this. It's very important. The Supreme Court is so that's a straw man. I don't think it's not important. I think it is very important. And I laid out my strategy for how the Democrats could fight. Now, you laid out a strategy for how the Democrats could roll over. And that's just the difference between me and you. And I think yours is complacent. It's establishment.
How do you know on day one? Mitch
fear.
McConnell? Wait a second. How do you know on day one Mitch McConnell won't change the rules to get rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court justices?
Oh my God, that is exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. There's your fucking political genius in action, thinking that somehow the Democrats were going to pull 2 years of obstruction, and the Republicans weren't going to resort to the nuclear option. He got nothing right.
How do you know on the first day Hillary won't bomb Syria with a nuclear weapon?
Well, all right.
How do you know?
I also don't know that the moon won't fall into Lake Michigan.
Right.
But you know what? I mean, honestly, Jimmy, to make those analogies, I think is indicative, and people can judge for themselves. People can judge for themselves. If people think that it is so far-fetched that Mitch McConnell will take the next step and get rid of filibusters, or change the threshold for filibusters for Supreme Court nominees so that Donald Trump can get his nominee through, is the same as Hillary Clinton sending a nuclear weapon to Syria. If people genuinely think the chances of those are the same, they can assess that.
So every crazy, fearful scenario you can concoct in your fear-riddled brain is accurate and makes sense. Right, that's to you.
So here's the guy who's talking about risk assessment, making him sound like some professional economics forecaster. And here's the guy who doesn't understand the difference of like two situations whose probability are in zero but nuking Syria on day one is 0.0001% versus the nuclear option in the Senate, which ended up happening, which you may have thought, well, maybe that has like a 5-10% chance of happening. This is your great risk analyst in action.
Every crazy,
No.
every time I say something, you move the goalpost once again. What if Mitch McConnell does this? What if there's 2 Supreme Court justices?
The point
What if
is
there's
the
this? What if
risk
there's that?
assessment
The
that you're
point is the
making
Democrats
doesn't
are
actually
spineless.
include any awareness of how politics work, Jimmy.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it does, Sam. And I just gave you my position, and you can't really refute it except you come up with some new fear scenario. So the scenario is the Democrats can filibuster. Right now, the Republicans aren't even giving the guy a hearing. So the fact is that can happen, but you want to roll over. It's the weakest, spineless Democrats.
The Republicans are not filibustering now. They're just not bringing up a nomination. They're not filibustering.
Without batting an eye. Without batting an eye, they won't fill that seat. And I'm saying the Democrats could do the same thing. And you're saying they won't.
Look at the polling of the Democratic Party. Look at the polling of the Democratic Party. The Democratic voters don't want their senators to do that. Republican voters do. Do you think that means nothing?
Oh, say it again.
If you look at polling as to actions of Democratic senators versus Republican senators, Republicans don't want compromise. Republican voters. Democratic voters do. Now, you and I may not agree with that, may not want Democratic voters to compromise, but that's what they do. Politicians react to what voters want.
We all know they don't.
They do in this instance.
We know
they
that.
do. We do know they do that, right? We do know that because we've never seen, Democratic politicians come out and say, "I won't compromise my principles. I won't compromise."
Writing this down. I'm going to write this down. Sam Seder says that Congress responds to the will of voters. This is a new one.
Well, all right.
So on issues of policy, I definitely do agree that no, neither Democrats nor Republicans listen to their voters, and that's been empirically tested. But on issues of, I guess, attitudes towards cooperation with the other side, yeah, it's true. Like, Democrats, both, the politicians as well as their voters, tend to see more positively things like, bipartisanship, reach across the aisle, things like that. Republicans are much more combative about this. And the reason is because their voters are as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship right there. But this is true. Like, they're more likely to follow the views of their voters on this issue, which again is not to say that they always listen to voters, which we know they don't.
That's a new one, because we know it's been proven scientifically, Sam, that that's not true. That's why we already live in an oligarchy, Sam. We already know that. You don't know that? Haven't you read those articles?
No, I've interviewed all those people, Jimmy. Look, let me tell you something.
I'm sorry, what?
I've interviewed all those people who wrote those articles.
Oh, so you know this?
Yeah, I do know this. Now, Jimmy, look.
Are you ignoring it?
People can assess whether or not your plan, I'll let you lay it out one more time without any interruption. How's this going to work? Donald Trump gets elected, and then tell me who controls the Senate and the House, and then what happens going forward.
So, but I just want to make sure you're standing by that Congress is influenced by voters.
I know that Democratic politicians project that they will compromise, and Republicans don't, and because their voters want those things.
Okay.
And there's no big money. There's no big money interests that are on the other side of that. And so that Martin Gillard's research that you're talking about shows that the only time that money trumps is when it's contested, and money doesn't give a shit about whether or not Republicans put on a face that they're not going to compromise and obstruct, and money doesn't give a shit whether or not Democratic politicians compromise. They don't care about that. They care about their issues. So go back, read that Gillen stuff, and understand it better. But give your plan.
So you're
people
saying
can assess it.
That I'm misinterpreting that Congress actually
No,
is
you read the
responsive to
top
voters.
line. But give your plan.
I'm saying,
give your plan so that people can assess
Okay.
it, and we'll let them decide.
Okay. So we didn't settle that issue. We'll move on to the next one. My plan is that if you're an environmentalist, if you want to re-regulate Wall Street, if you're for less war, if you're for fighting climate change, if you're against fracking, if you're in that movement, that the Democratic Party offers you a graveyard, that you're going to have to fight those same people. So I agree with Chris Hayes and Ben Howe from RedState.com that if Donald Trump is president, he fractures the Republican Party. Paul Ryan is not going to usher through his agenda. He's such an incompetent. There will be on nothing but scandal, 100%. He will be ineffectual. He won't be able to get anything done. And in 2 years, we flip the Congress, we flip the Senate to Democrat. We could do it right now if Hillary was a little smarter. Number two, And then in 4 years we get a real Democrat instead of a fake liberal who's going to push Republican policies. And as far as the Supreme Court goes, right now I've already laid it out a million times. Right now, I say the Democrats can do what the Republicans are doing. I know they're not filibustering, but what they're doing is they're not filling the seat on purpose. And you think that the public opinion will have make them compromise. Anyway, I'm saying that we can do what the Republicans are doing. You're advocating for more spineless liberalism and roll over and take it. I'm saying let's fight the power now, because we're going to have to fight the power no matter what. We're going to have to fight Hillary to get rid of more wars. We're going to have to fight Hillary to get rid of fracking. We're going to have to fight Hillary to re-regulate Wall Street. So that's my position. I appreciate you letting me make it, and I understand that you think I'm uninformed. And I don't think that of you. I think you're very informed. I think we just disagree. And I was kidding. I think you're more handsome than me.
Well, I think we look very similar, frankly. And I know we buy all our clothes and get our glasses at the same place. I mean, I think it's people would have trouble picking us out of a lineup. I mean, yeah. I think. There it is. I mean, people can assess whether or not the chances of the Democrats taking back the Senate in 2 years, whether or not Democrats. It would be nice if they did a unprecedented filibuster for 2 years, and that there's no danger of other Supreme Court justices passing away, and that at a time where there will be no major election of a reality show star to attract people's attention away from their preventing a ninth justice from sitting on the court, and perhaps an eighth justice from sitting on the court. All that would be wonderful if that were the case, and it would be great if a Republican Senate and House and President passed no legislation and didn't in any way harm climate change, didn't reverse the Paris Accords, as small as a step in the right direction as they may be, or undo things like, I don't know, FDA regulations, EPA regulations, education regulations. That would be great if all that happens. And for your sake, I hope you're right.
All of that effectively did happen under Trump.
That all those things do happen.
And I hope you're right. I hope I'm right too. I'm not. Again, I'm not saying. I'm saying I'm taking a calculated risk. And when the choices are Hillary and Donald Trump, and I'm not telling anybody to vote for Donald Trump, by the way. I'm saying if you want to hold your nose and vote for Hillary, that's okay too. I'm just letting people know that there's another work out. That's what I'm saying. And that all the pundits who thought they knew everything about everything are the ones who led us to this position right now. All the pundits who've been screwing over working people for 30 years.
I'm a pundit who thinks he knows everything about everything, and I don't feel like I'm responsible for where we are right now.
No, I've been telling people it's mostly Sam Seder.
Well, as long as they spell my name right, then that'll work out. Well, Jimmy, I appreciate your calling in, and
so there you have it, guys. That is your political idol, your political genius, the person that you go and make fools of yourselves on Twitter, defending, bend over backwards, like members of a cult. That's the guy who, in this debate, with the benefit of hindsight, where we can test every single prediction, realized he got all of them wrong. Because guess what happened after Trump ended up winning, as he clearly preferred happening? We did not get a progressive leftist winning in 2020. We did not get the Democratic Party shifting to the left, as he has mentioned in other videos, because there's another debate between him and Sam Seder that preceded this one. Maybe I'll do a reaction to it as well, if you want me to, write in the comments. He made that case in that other debate, basically, that the Democratic Party would have no choice if it lost to Trump, that it would have to move left. And guess what happened? We ended up with another spineless neoliberal president by the name of Joe Biden. That's what happened, Jimmy. That was your roadmap towards progressive leftism in America. It didn't work. All your predictions failed. And that's the problem with people like him, that they don't think about that roadmap. They just care about the performative aspect of being a leftist. And I emphasized this in the previous video, and I'll emphasize it again. This is performative leftism. This is just rehashing words that make you feel good. It is just saying that you are anti-imperialist, anti-neoliberalism, anti-big pharma, anti-fracking, and thinking that that alone means you know what you're actually saying. It means to them that you have an idea of the society you want to live in after all of this has been achieved, after all these victories have been achieved. What is your plan? And I would not trust someone to have a plan for that future when they basically don't even have a plan for the next 4 years. Because everything he said proved wrong. Nothing that he said was going to happen ended up happening. And that's why there's so much bad blood between Jimmy Dore and Sam Seder. Because you cannot see a debate like this and think that you weren't completely humiliated. Even back then. Because it showed a complete disregard for just basic knowledge about how politics works in the US. Like basic stuff about the Supreme Court, about the abilities of eliminating filibusters in the Senate, basic knowledge about gerrymandering. He clearly didn't know any of this. And this is the guy that people make fools of themselves defending in the comment section on YouTube and on Twitter and everyone else. This is the idol of a certain segment of the left, which sadly is getting louder and louder. This is the reason that I'm bothering making a video like this, because I genuinely think people like Jimmy Dore are such a toxic influence on the left that they are helping destroy it. So, again, you cannot see this debate with the benefit of hindsight and think that out of these two characters, you're going to follow the one who got everything wrong. And this is not to say that you should become a Sam Seder fan in any way, because maybe Sam Seder doesn't share your politics. Maybe he doesn't share your ideology. Maybe you are more to the left than Sam Seder is. And frankly, a big part of the online left is more left than Sam Seder is. But this is just basic. This is basic stuff. Just in the same way that you can say, hey, just because the mainstream media is fear-mongering about Trump, and these are the same guys that led us to the Iraq War, then I'm not going to listen to them fear-monger over this. No, that's not how logic works. Logic works by understanding the issues and thinking, oh, it just so happens that I also agree that Trump would be a very bad thing. And the fact that the mainstream media shares that fear could be for all the wrong reasons on their part. But it doesn't mean that I have to be opposed to it just because they bring it up. And that's what's, again, I think there is something really wrong with people whose mind doesn't work in ways that can reconcile issues like this. And frankly, I don't understand why, because I don't think this is hard. I really don't think this is hard. You don't need a PhD. You don't need to read an encyclopedia of logic to get this. This is basic stuff. And if you don't get it, then you're doing a disservice to political analysis, because you're not contributing in any positive way. And I don't think Jimmy Dore is a positive influence on the left. I don't think he's a positive influence on anyone whatsoever, because the good things that Jimmy Dore says, someone else probably says it. Perhaps not as loudly as he does, but will probably say it in a much more intelligent and nuanced way. And instead of following a charlatan and a grifter like Jimmy Dore, why don't you follow the other people who get things right? And it matters. It really does matter, because political analysis and political commentary without any predictive power is pointless, utterly pointless, right? if you disregard the predictive capability of people, if you disregard the forecasting aspect of political analysis, that's not political analysis. That's being a historian, basically. You're just going to, analyze what happened and leave it at that. No, you need to know what you think is going to happen. And someone who demonstrates a complete incapacity of doing that is not worth listening to. It really isn't. But frankly, nothing I say will ever convince a Jimmy Dore fan, because his is a cult and they think like cultists. And I'm sure this video is going to get 4 times as many dislikes as likes. I don't care. But hopefully, among however many people watch it and disagree with it, if one person realizes just how useless Jimmy Dore is and how toxic he is to the left, if one person realizes that and moves away from him, I would consider that a victory. So, if you enjoyed this video, please like, please share, please subscribe, or feel free to dislike. I really don't care. But yeah, just don't follow Jimmy Dore. They're so much better. You can do better. Please, you can do better. Don't destroy the left. Don't contribute. If you really are a committed leftist, don't be on the side of someone who doesn't care if the left goes up in flames, as long as he gets views on YouTube. That's all I have to say. And see you next time.